We know that baseline data is important to see a learner's progress. In this blog, we're talking about how to collect baseline data during skill acquisition programs. So I go into a lot of ABA centers. I go into a lot of ABA home programs. And, people do things differently sometimes, but for the most part, people collect baseline data, which is amazing because you're supposed to. However, I've been into some programs that collect baseline data for literally weeks on end. And there's this huge stack of data of programs that kids can't do or that they've mastered out of, and it's 100%, 100%, 100%. And I look at this and go, ooh, okay, someone needs to chat more about baseline data. So in this blog, we're going to be talking about specifically what is baseline data, ways to collect baseline data, and how to use baseline data effectively to check progress. So without further ado, what is baseline data and why do we do it? Baseline data is really about collecting data to determine your teaching step. So, I know based on assessment that my student cannot follow one-step instructions. Okay, great. But maybe my student follows a few one-step instructions, but just not all of them. So, I pull up my teaching program and I really want to know what step to start on. So I baseline the whole program to see, can the student follow a few, instructions? And if so, what instructions are they? So I don't need to teach those instructions because they already know them. I'm not going to waste their time and get onto the instructions and teaching those instructions that the student doesn't know. So there's a few ways to collect baseline data, but I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the way we collect baseline data. So this, for instance, is a follows one-step instructions program. And this would be the program outline here. And basically, I'm looking at this and it just says, teach one-step instructions, teach them in a set of 3. So here might be some suggested targets, right? And what I'm going to do for a baseline is I'm going to test all of these, okay? So I can make a baseline sheet up like this that just says, okay, I'm going to give these instructions and I put a plus or I put a minus. So in this case, I will, put a plus or I could put, a minus. Let me just do this really quickly. I can do a minus, right? So, if I say to the student, high five, and I know it's a little bit prompted because my hand's up, but that's probably the purpose of the first few of them, right? So I say, high five. The student gives me a high five. I'm going to put a plus, okay? If I say, pick it up, and the student stares at me and goes, I'm going to put a minus, right? If I say, sit down, the student's attending and doesn't sit down, it's a minus, okay? So I'm going to go through that for all of them. Make sure I'm getting some attending, make sure I'm setting up some motivation. And I'm just going to go through and go check, 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 check. The student can do this one. The student can't do this one. The student can do this one. The student can't do this one. So say, for instance, I get a profile that looks something like this. So I've got, a lot of pluses. I've got a lot of minuses, but I also have some pluses. So, we've got minuses here all the way down. I'm not going to waste time doing this right now, but just pretend that all the minuses are here. And I've tested all of them. Okay, this is my baseline. I look at this. I've done this in probably a minute, 2 minutes. It doesn't take very long to do this. And I go, okay, is there any chance that this student was is this just chance? Were they just maybe not attending when I said the instruction? Or, do they really understand what high five was, wave by, and jump? Do they really understand that, or was that fluke? Let me try that again. So what I'm going to do is I might do baseline and I might just test it a couple more times. And look, they actually do know it, right? So that they actually, they've responded each and every time. Now, maybe they weren't attending when I said sit down, but the second time around, they actually did sit down. The rest of them, they may have gotten minuses. So I might test this 1 to 2 times, depends on the program. If it's, say, an identifies colors program, and I know that they really don't know colors, I'm going to go through it very quick, like point to red, point to blue, point to yellow. Okay, you don't have it. Okay, let's move on. Baseline's at 0, go. If it's something that I think they do have a few instructions, I'm going to spend a bit more time on it. I might spend, an entire 10 minutes on it instead of 30 seconds. I might spend, maybe do it across another day if they're having a tough day that one day. I might do it across a second day. But that's it. I would only do it 1 to 2 days, and that's it. And then I've got my baseline data. Also, during baseline, it's really important not to reinforce for particular skills. So if I'm testing one-step instructions, I am not going to be I'm not going to be reinforcing for those things. So if I say wave bye and the student waves by, I'm not going to go, wow, that's great, you waved goodbye. Because what's happening is I'm risking reinforcing that behavior, which is okay when you're teaching, but when you're baselining and you're just getting an idea for what the skill is like, you want to just really quickly wave by. They can do it, then that you would just move on to something else. If they can't do it, again, you're not correcting anything, you're just moving on to something else. So again, during baseline, it's pretty important to make sure that you're not reinforcing what you're teaching or what you're testing, but take some other things and reinforce other things. So you may want to reinforce for things like, wow, that's really great sitting. I love the way you're attending or looking, or, hey, I'm going to pull in this other program that I know you can do no problem. Like maybe it's Copy Me program and you can do that no problem. Fantastic. I'm going to pull that in and then I'll reinforce for those things. So a baseline might look like this. It might say, wave by, student waves. And then I might say something like, okay, do this, which is the Copy Me program. Student does this. I go, wow, that's amazing. You copied me. Amazing. And then I might say jump and the student doesn't jump. And I just move on and I say, okay, dance. Student doesn't dance. I say stomp feet. Student doesn't stomp feet. But I say, wow, I really love the way you're looking or sitting or whatever. Here you go. Here's reinforcement. So that's what a baseline looks like. Once I have these data collected, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph it. So let's pretend I'm looking at this, but let's pretend this is about 40%. You're not going to really pretend in real life. You're actually going to do this properly. But for the purposes of this, because it's quick, you're going to put the date down, obviously. Okay, so the date goes here. Maybe it's August 8th. And then you're going to put down BL for the set number. BL stands for baseline. And just in here, you're going to mark down 30%. So I can just do something like this with maybe an open dot or a closed dot. Some people use an X, and that's it. That's all my baseline is. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a change in condition. And I usually just mark changes in conditions with little hash marks here. If you're using an Excel graph is way prettier than this, and you can do changing condition lines in Excel. So that's what you would do, and then you would go on to your teaching set. So if I know from my baseline data that my student can do high five, no problem, and they can do pick it up, or they can't do pick it up, and they can sometimes do sit down, but it's not perfect. I'm going to look here and say, okay, teaching set number 1 says high five, pick it up, sit down. I know I don't need to teach high five. It's already mastered. I may even put a little M in here. Can I draw that in with this? A little M like this, just to say mastered. And then I might just teach pick it up and sit down. Or I might teach pick it up, sit down, and come here, depending on the learner. So if I'm just teaching pick it up and sit down, what I'm going to do is, whether it's the same day or whether it's a different day, it can be the same day. Why waste time, right? So same day, I'm going to actually go in and I'm going to do set 1. So I'm going to pre-test just set 1. And set 1 is only those 2 items right now. And I know pick it up and sit down are, variable. Pick it up doesn't seem to have. Sit down, according to baseline, has done it a few times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, pick it up. Student errors on pick it up. So I'm going to just circle N, and then I'm going to go to sit down and the student errors on sit down. And then I'm going to go, I might say sit down again, and the student actually sits down. So again, I'm not going to correct during this, and I'm also not going to reinforce during this. I'm going to reinforce for other things because I'm testing right now. This is a pre-test. And, I go through this and I say, pick it up again. I know the student does not know pick it up. I also know the student isn't very strong with sit down. I'm not going to ask for pick it up over and over and over again because the student doesn't know it. And I just don't want to frustrate the student. So I'm going to do 5 trials. I'm not going to do a million trials. If the student's getting 0, I'm probably only going to do 3 trials. Like I really don't want to, elicit negative behavior. That's not my goal. So, I've got my data. My data is 20% according to this. I'm going to graph this with an X. An X will indicate pretest. I'll graph that at 20%. And then the next day, I can start teaching, and I'll actually start teaching. And that's when I use the reinforcement. And that's when I would graph and connect those other dots with dots and zeros. And that's how you would perform a baseline. So just to summarize, we talked about what is baseline data and how to collect baseline data. And then really, you want to look at that baseline data really to, show that your students made progress over time. So, once your program is mastered, you can go back and you can actually do a quick, what I would call post-test, or basically just redo that baseline again and show that the student has made that progress over time. So in summary, we talked about what is baseline data and ways to collect baseline data and how to use baseline data effectively to check for progress. So click the link in and around this video to get your free baseline reference guide.